So who lacks this capacity? Okay, we've talked about capacity a lot. Who doesn't have it? All right. Let's go down to the second bullet point here, and we'll look at the three groups of people that we're going to look at that lack capacity. Okay, these are people with mental impairments, minors, and intoxicated persons. Intoxicated means that they are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Okay, so even though these people lack capacity for one reason or another, they can still enter into contracts. That's what we talked about earlier. Okay. The difference, though, is they can generally disaffirm the contracts or get out of them. Most people who have capacity, once they're in the contract, they're held to it. But the people that lack capacity, so somebody that would fall into those three groups at the bottom of the slide, even though they can enter into it, they can get out of it. They can disaffirm that contract. All right, so over the course of the next couple slides, we're going to go through the three different groups of people that lack capacity. Okay, the first one that we have are people with mental impairments. Okay, so why would a mental impairment allow a person to get out of a contract? The answer is the individual would not be able to understand what was going on when they entered into the contract. Think about it. If for one reason or another I have some sort of mental impairment or disability and I'm not clearly able to understand what I'm agreeing to because of my mental disability or impairment, that's outside of my control. The law is going to allow people that fall into that category to get out of the contract because they never understood what they were really getting into in the first place. Okay, second question. At what time would a person need to have a mental impairment? They need to have the mental impairment at the time they entered into the contract. Okay, that's the point in time when the law is going to determine, did they know what they were getting into? If they've had a mental impairment in the past, but they weren't mentally impaired at the time that they entered into the contract, that doesn't matter. The law is only going to look at when they entered into the contract, were they able to understand what they were getting into? Okay, the third consideration here, who determines if someone has a mental impairment? Doctors. Okay, I put that in bold because that's an important concept to understand. It's a doctor who is going to determine whether or not a person had a mental impairment at the time that they entered into a contract. It's not going to be the lawyers. It's not going to be the judges. Ultimately, it's going to be the doctor who is going to make that determination. A lawyer or a judge doesn't have the education and the experience to determine if somebody is mentally impaired. That's a medical condition, so it will be left to a doctor to make that decision. Right, so on this slide I have something for you to think about. Okay, so suppose that someone who is suffering from severe depression and enters into a contract. So do we think that that individual has the capacity to enter into a contract? Some people would say yes, and some people would say no. Some people would make the argument that severe depression is a mental impairment and that a person can't make sound decisions or understand really what they're getting into at the time that they're severely depressed. Okay, I have here the degree to which an illness impacts the ability to make a sound decision is subjective. Two people may have very differing views on this. One person may argue, well, severe depression is a horrible thing, but it doesn't impact your ability to understand agreements. Another person might look at it as, no, their depression is influencing their judgment and it's not allowing them to think clearly. It's subjective, okay? The key point here, though, is who's going to make that determination. It's not going to be either party of the contract. It's not going to be a lawyer. It's not going to be the judge. It will be up to a doctor, okay, or maybe a group of doctors to determine whether the person that had severe depression knew what they were getting into. Okay, they weren't mentally impaired to the point where they didn't understand when they entered into the contract. It's going to be the doctor's say in this scenario. Okay, so now the second group of individuals that lack capacity are minors. Okay, so when we talk about minors, we're talking about people under the age of 18 in the United States. Okay, it represents a person that hasn't reached the age of adulthood. Okay, we've talked a couple times now, or we've mentioned a couple times, minors can and often enter into contracts. The difference, though, is minors can get out of contracts under most circumstances. This is to protect minors. Okay, Why does the law allow this? Under the eyes of the law, and you may disagree with these things, minors are considered too inexperienced, too immature, unknowledgeable, and or naive to enter into binding contracts. That's why the law allows minors to get out of these contracts, because they don't understand, or they don't have the knowledge to make a sound decision about whether or not it's a good idea for them to enter into this contract. It's to protect minors as well from being tricked, okay, or being deceived by unethical business owners or business practices, whatever it might be. Ultimately, the law is trying to protect minors under contract law. So a couple key concepts about minors. So what is a minor? It's a person who's not reached the age of adulthood. Okay, that's also called the age of majority. If you're not in the majority, you're in the minority. Thus, if somebody who's under 18 is considered a minor. Okay, what is the age of majority in Pennsylvania? 18. What is an emancipated minor? So an emancipated minor is a person under 18 that's no longer under legal control of their parents. Okay, this can be achieved through setting up their own household, marriage, or suing for emancipation. Okay, for one reason or another, okay, whether it be a person under the age of 18 is running their own house, okay, they may have kids, they may have dependents, maybe they're married, okay, or they were in some sort of situation where they had to sue, okay, or they took their case to court to get their emancipation. Okay, what this means is they are no longer considered a minor in the eyes of the law. They are considered emancipated minor. They're still under 18, but they're considered to have reached majority. Okay, that means that the protections afforded to them as a minor are no longer afforded to them, because in the eyes of the law, they're no longer considered a minor. They're considered a legal adult. All right, so we have established that minors can disaffirm or get out of contracts that they enter into. Okay, there's a little bit more that goes into that. There's some considerations and things that need to be looked at to fully understand this concept. So for items that you buy, you have to return the items to the store in a reasonable amount of time. It's going to be up to the judge or the jury, whoever's giving the verdict in the case, to determine what that reasonable amount of time is. Okay, but the thing to remember here is, if you buy something and you want to get out of it, you have to give it back in a reasonable amount of time. You can't just say, I'm a minor, you have to give me my money back. Well, if you don't give the item back, then that's not the case. So let's move on to the third bullet point here. If items are damaged, the store can reduce the amount of money they give you back. So if you buy a t-shirt, okay, at the store, and you spill coffee on your t-shirt and it leaves a stain on the t-shirt, you can still take the t-shirt back, okay? The difference though is the store can reduce the amount of money that they give you back. So they're gonna say, well, you're giving us back the t-shirt, but it's damaged, so you originally paid $20 for it. Maybe we'll only give you back $3 because that's the value of the t-shirt now. I don't really know what the value would be. It would be up to the store and the customer to have that discussion about the reduction in value. But the point is, if you damage the item and you want to disaffirm the contract, you're going to get a reduced amount of money. Okay. Last point here, when you become an adult, okay, you reach that age of majority, 18 years old, you can disaffirm a contract that was made while still a minor, but only in a reasonable period of time. And once again, it's going to be up to the judge and jury to determine what that reasonable period of time is. Some examples are going to be pretty clear, okay? If you're 10 years after 18, so now you're 28 and you want to go back and disaffirm a contract, the judge or the jury is probably going to say no, okay? If it's been, a month, then they're probably going to let you do it. Now, maybe it's a gray area, maybe it's only a year. It's going to be up to the judge or the jury to make that decision. Okay, but you still have the right to try to disaffirm a contract even after you've reached the age of adulthood, if you made the purchase as a minor. All right, so let's say that you enter into a contract as a minor and you want to disaffirm it. You want to get out of it. You can't pick and choose which parts of the contract you disaffirm, okay? You have to either stay with the whole contract as it was originally, or get out of the entire contract as it was accepted. So let's use an example here. You can't buy an iPhone and decide to keep the headphones that come with the iPhone. All items must be returned. Your original agreement was to buy the iPhone, and iPhones typically come with headphones, okay? If you're going to get out of that contract, you have to give both the iPhone and the headphones back. You can't keep one or the other, okay? Contracts between two minors can be disaffirmed by both parties. So if I am 17 years old and I enter into a contract with another person who's 17 years old, we're both minors, both of us can get out of the contract. If an adult finds out that you're a minor, okay, the adult cannot get out of the contract for that reason alone. So let's say that me as an adult sell you as a minor something. I don't know that you're a minor at the time that I sell it, okay? But then later on I find out. I can't get out of that contract. You still can because you're the minor, but me as the adult, I have to take the contract as is, okay? There's nothing that I can change. It was up to me to figure out whether or not you were a minor before I entered into the contract with you. All right, so let's talk about lying about your age. And I have an example here to illustrate this point. Suppose you and your friend lie about your age to get in the movie theater to see an R-rated movie. Okay, you have to be 17 years old to do that. The movie theater later finds out that you are not 17. Can they disaffirm this contract? Okay, you lacked capacity. Could you disaffirm the contract and get your money back? And then the last point here, what tort would you have committed? Okay, so let's break it down question by question. Can the movie theater disaffirm the contract? No, the movie theater cannot disaffirm the contract, okay? They are a party of majority and you are a party of minority. Therefore, they don't have the right to disaffirm the contract. You as a minor, though, could disaffirm the contract, okay? Now, the more important thing here, though, is what tort have you committed? You have committed fraud, okay? You lied about your age, okay? That is considered fraud. You could be sued by the movie theater if they wanted to pursue legal action, okay? So don't think that just because you're a minor you can lie about your age and get into these contracts and then get out of them, and the law affords you all these protections. The law does afford you protections, but the law does not want to see those protections violated. So the movie theater still is within their right to pursue a tort lawsuit of fraud against you, and that ultimately is going to be of much more damage to you personally than it's going to be to the movie theater of, you know, getting out of a $13 movie ticket. So don't lie about your age, okay? And don't think that contract protections as a minor are, you know, never ending, okay? They do have limits. Okay, so now I want to shift from disaffirming a contract to ratifying a contract. So ratification is the act of agreeing to go along with a contract that could be disaffirmed. Okay, so this is a contract that we're going to say, you know, typically I could get out of it for one reason or another, or one party could get out of the contract for one reason or another. They could disaffirm it. But rather than doing that, we're going to have a binding agreement where we're going to say we're not going to disaffirm. That is ratification, okay? So minors typically can disaffirm a contract. Thus, minors can ratify a contract after becoming an adult. So once you turn 18 years old, if you've entered into a contract that, you know, you could have disaffirmed because you entered into it as a minor, but you want to stay with the contract, you can ratify it. Okay, once ratified, you cannot get out of the contract. Once you make that declaration of ratification, that you're locked into the contract. There's no going back. Okay, now a very practical application of this. Say you buy a car at 17 years old, okay? That is a contract that you could disaffirm. Now, you may have trouble finding somebody that would sell you a car at 17 years old because of the fact that they know that you could get out of it, okay? But once you make your first payment as an adult, that first payment after you turn 18 years old, that is you signaling to the other party that you've ratified the contract, okay? So think of a car payment on a car you bought as a minor. What that's saying is once you turn 18 and you make that first payment, you're in essence ratifying the contract And if you want to get out of that contract after you've made that first payment, you're probably not going to be able to, because it's going to go to court. The first thing that the judge is going to ask is, have you made a payment after you turned 18? If the answer is yes, they're going to say, well, you've signaled that you've ratified the contract, and we're not going to let you out of that agreement. Okay, so that's ratification. That's something very important to think of if you've made major purchases as a minor and a payment comes up after you've turned 18. All right, so now some exceptions to the rule. These are examples of contracts that you as a minor typically cannot get out of, okay? Car insurance. Contracts for a business run by a minor, okay? So if you have your own business and you're 17 years old and you're running it and you're buying supplies, that means that you're entering into contracts with people that are selling you things. Those contracts that you're entering into as a business owner, even though you're under 18, are still going to be upheld. Apartment rentals, if you sign a contract for an apartment rental, that's going to be upheld, okay? Military enlistment, so if you decide that you want to join the Navy or the Air Force, once you sign that contract with whatever branch of the military it is, that's a contract that you're probably not going to get out of, even though you're a minor, okay? As a driver, you're held to the same responsibilities as adults. I've said that multiple times in this class. I just want to say it here, okay? Key takeaway, use good judgment when entering into a contract. Don't enter into contracts just because, well, let me rephrase. Don't enter into contracts with the intention that you're going to get out of the contract, okay? That's not a wise move. Every contract that you enter into, either as a minor or an adult, you want to understand it, you want to understand what you're getting into, and you want to be entering into it using good judgment. Don't enter into contracts with the expectation that you're just going to disaffirm it, okay? All right, so in the last slide I mentioned that driving is a privilege, not a right. So minors and driving. Okay, typically we like to think that minors have different privileges or have a little bit more lenient standards when it comes to legal responsibilities. The one area where this is not true is when it comes to driving, okay? Driving is very much a privilege, okay? In PA, you have to be 16 years of age to get a permit. You have to pass a written test, a physical exam, an eye exam, 65 hours of adult supervised skill building, a road exam, okay? There's 6 months after you get your permit till you can even take that. The law puts a lot of responsibilities on young people that are 16, to get a driver's license, okay? The reason for that is when it comes to driving, you're held to the same responsibilities as adults. If you get into a car accident, okay, and you can't just say, oh, well, I'm under 18, so I shouldn't be held liable for the damages to the other person's car. That's not true. You will be held liable, and that's why you need to have car insurance, okay? Either through your parents' name or through your own name. You need to be on that policy. That's one of the reasons why states will not let minors get out of contracts involving auto insurance, okay? It's presumed that if you have auto insurance, you're driving, you need to have protection, because you're going to be held to the same standards as adults when it comes to maintaining the safety of your vehicle. Okay, so very important to remember that driving is a privilege, it's not a right. All right, so the third group of people that we looked at as can disaffirm a contract are intoxicated persons. Okay, these are people under the influence of drugs or alcohol and can sometimes get out of contracts. In order to get out of the contract, they would have had to have been impaired at the time the contract was entered into. Okay. Now, this is different than mental impairment. Okay, that's the third bullet point. It's up to a judge or jury to determine if the person did not understand what they were agreeing to at the time the contract was accepted. When it comes to mental impairment, it's a doctor. When it comes to intoxicated persons, it's going to be the judge or jury to determine whether the person knew what they were getting into at the time they entered into the contract, based upon whether or not they were influenced by drugs or alcohol to the point where they couldn't make a strong or a good understanding of what they were agreeing to. Okay. It's going to be the judge or jury to make that decision. Okay, so this concludes our discussion of capacity. We now will move on to legality in our next video lesson. Thank you.